Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. On this episode, our story takes us to the Kremlin, where Russian President Vladimir Putin has been hosting Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. According to the latter, Thursday's meeting focused on the indirect negotiations between Iran and the United States. Now, these indirect U.S. Iran talks kicked off on April 12 in Oman. Both sides described these initial talks as constructive, which in diplomat speak usually means we didn't storm out yelling. They were so constructive, in fact, that they're continuing in Rome this weekend. So, without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
This is yet another display of friendship between Russia and Iran. The meeting between Vladimir Putin and the Iranian foreign minister was also an opportunity for the latter to deliver a message from Iran's leader himself. In this letter, Ali Khamenei briefed Putin on regional and bilateral issues.
Our regular exchanges with Russia and China have allowed us to align our positions. The current timing provides an appropriate opportunity to continue these discussions with Russian officials.
The meeting comes at a time when Iran is deep into discussions with the United States surrounding its nuclear program. Following the talks in Oman, which both sides called constructive, a second round is set to take place in Rome. Donald Trump has threatened Iran with bombings and an extension of tariffs to third countries which buy Iranian oil, if Tehran does not come to an agreement over the nuclear program.
I think Iran could be a great country as long as it doesn't have nuclear weapons. If they have nuclear weapons, they'll never get a chance to be a great country.
Trump and Iran have been at odds since the U.S. president's first term, when he pulled out of the so-called Iran nuclear deal in 2018. Back then, Trump has called it, quote, a horrible, one-sided deal that should have never, ever been made.
Now let's zone in on the East-splaining portion of our show. Iran and Russia are currently regarded as quite close partners. While relations between the countries weren't always as positive as they are now, the last decade has given them ample opportunity to work together and find common enemies.
Today, Shahed drones are the most infamous symbol of Russo-Iranian cooperation. These UAVs are bought en masse by Moscow and have been used by the Russians to bomb Ukrainian cities and infrastructure since the early stages of the war. But the drone sharing is merely an example of how these two countries work together, not why. The reason behind the partnership lies in several different areas and isn't as simple as both nations being run by despots. Iran and Russia are both under heavy Western sanctions. To an extent, their friendship is one of convenience. If they cannot trade with the West, they will settle for each other. Iran also joined BRICS in 2024, an organization bringing together various states which do not like what they call the West's hegemony over the global economy. But beyond economic dealings, Iran and Russia also share geopolitical partners in many cases. Bashar al-Assad's former regime in Syria was one. Both Moscow and Tehran supported Assad in the Syrian civil war. In essence, this alliance boils down to a single common interest, creating a counterweight to the US-led world order in geopolitics, economy, and the military. This shared goal also forms the basis for both Russia and Iran's good relationship with China. Beijing is one of the major forces pushing for what it calls a multipolar world order. But while all three of these countries may fit right in together today, historically, they are not traditional allies.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Back in the Kremlin, Araghchi handed Putin a personal message from Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei. And what's in the message, we may never know. But we can assume it wasn't just an invitation to play 8-ball pool. Interestingly, Russia has an awkward balancing act here. It remains one of the original signatories to the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, a deal from which President Trump exited in 2018 during his previous term, treating it like an overpriced gym membership that he regretted signing up for. Now, Moscow finds itself mediating between Washington and Tehran, all while simultaneously engaged in direct negotiations with the United States about Ukraine. Putin's Russia has cleverly positioned itself as a key middleman. While Moscow helps facilitate Washington-Tehran discussions, Putin also leverages this position for his own strategic interests in Ukraine and elsewhere. So, why does this matter? While the outcome of these negotiations don't just impact Iran's nuclear ambitions, they ripple through global politics, influencing oil prices, regional security, and how aggressively Vladimir Putin feels he can act in Ukraine without international backlash. As one of the few states providing military assistance to Moscow, Iran plays a controversial role in the conflict. Tehran has supplied Russia with drones used to target Ukrainian infrastructure, a move that has drawn condemnation from the West and intensified scrutiny on Iran's international activities. The Kremlin likely used the meeting to update Iran on the status of Russia-US talks over Ukraine, offering insights of reassurances that could shape Iran's posture in upcoming multilateral negotiations. The Russia-Ukraine war isn't just a European crisis. It's become a bargaining tool in broader power plays stretching from Washington to Tehran. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Łukasz Frederick, Director, Institute of the Middle East and Far East at Jagiellonian University. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So today we are examining Russia's attempt at being the mediator between Iran and the United States. Now, most people in the States are, of course, focusing on the nuclear deal, but here in Europe, we can't help but wonder if this is some sort of ploy by Putin to perhaps use this as a bargaining tool when it comes to their negotiation with Ukraine.
Well, absolutely. It's the Moscow's optics will differ here from Tehran's optics on this issue. Moscow will try to combine different files. They are very good at combining their different, let's say, vectors of their foreign policy. However, with Iran, they need to be somehow cautious since, as we saw in the previous years, Iranian file brings a lot of challenges for Moscow because it is linked to some other important partners of Russia in the Middle East. By that, I mean particularly Gulf states, the UAE, also Saudi Arabia, as well as to a lesser extent Turkey or Israel. So what we've seen in the previous rounds of interactions between Iranian and Russian counterparts was that Russia was somehow reluctant as of recently of fully supporting Iranian line or Iranian foreign policy direction, particularly because of those concerns related to those other important Middle Eastern partners of Russian Federation. Hence, the role of, or trying to present itself in a role of mediator is a sort of a comfortable position for Moscow. But let's not forget that in the Middle East, generally, Moscow is rather perceived as the ally of Iran, even though the two countries are not formally allied. There is no formal alliance between them.
Right, and we can see by Iran supporting Russia with their Shahed drones and also, like you mentioned, becoming sort of a link with the Gulf state that they do have vested interest in being in good relations. But do you think this negotiation between U.S. and Iran, if mediated by Russia, will mean that Russia might perhaps sacrifice some of Iranian interests in order to gain its own interests when it comes to their interest in Ukraine?
Well, that is definitely that perspective which is visible for Iranian authorities in Tehran, and I perceive the recent visit of Abbas Araghchi in Moscow rather as sort of messaging from the supreme leader of Iran, obviously, to President Putin that Russia is not totally sidelined. However, I don't see in this particular moment that Iranians would push very hard to secure Russian position with the negotiation table. I see it rather as a sort of coordination. Iranians, from the Iranians' perspective, they are trying to strengthen their position by presenting themselves as a country which closely coordinates its foreign policy with more powerful states, namely Russia. But it's worth mentioning also that before traveling to Moscow, Foreign Minister Araghchi, he mentioned also that Iran is trying to coordinate with its policy or its stance regarding the Iranian-U.S. negotiations with the other important partner, namely China. That is the game. Obviously, the next round of the negotiations, which will, as we know, today it will take part in Rome, most probably, because it was still the venue was not confirmed up until very recently. Will be done with the primarily Omani mediation, right? The Omanis are perceived as a, let's say, somehow independent mediators without vested interest in any side, neither with the U.S., neither with Iran. And I think that the Omani role Omani diplomacy will play this pivotal role, mostly because they are perceived as really being not biased by any side of those negotiations.
Right. So how do they go about juggling their own interests with, well, like you mentioned, trying to being perceived as being aligned with powerful nations such as Russia? When it comes to this negotiation, I do not foresee a very easy path to come to a conclusion when it comes to negotiating with the current U.S. administration.
Right. So as far as the, let's say, leaks are coming out of negotiation teams, I think that we may say that there are here at least two options regarding those the further piece of those negotiations. Let's say one option is the traditional one, or the one which in which it'll be a step-by-step approach, right? In which U.S. and Iran will do a very small incremental steps in building confidence and solving small issues before addressing the huge one, namely the nuclear enrichment program, which Iranians state that it's non-negotiable for them. Now, the other option which lingers as of recently is the approach in which instead of doing that step-by-step approach, the negotiation teams will directly go for direct meeting between President Trump and President Pezeshkian in, let's say, near future, which would bring the heavyweights to the table, and that could probably bring some breakthrough moment in that process. So yesterday we had a very rare event in Middle Eastern diplomacy, namely we had the visit of Khalid bin Salman, the Saudi the Minister of Defense, in Tehran. So that's unusual event because last time Saudi Minister of Defense visited Tehran, it was like almost 30 years ago. So the negotiations are happening in Oman. They will happen in Rome, but there is also a messaging or exchange of messages indirect through some important politicians in countries like Saudi Arabia, which are closely or much closer to the US. And we may assume that the Saudi Minister of Defense is talking with Iranian counterparts about bilateral issues, but also very important part of that visit is probably discussing the potential breakthrough in negotiations and maybe perhaps moving into that track where the presidents of both states could possibly meet.
All right, so just to drag this conversation back to broader geopolitics, I'm also wondering if this negotiation turned out to be, satisfactory to the U.S. administration. Does this put Moscow in a position where they are being seen as more as a reliable negotiator and would perhaps give them a better opportunity when it comes to their own interest in negotiating the ceasefire deal with war in Ukraine?
Right, so It is definitely, we may say that there is a link between potential success of the U.S. administration negotiating with Iran and, let's say, a bigger or a stronger position regarding Russia or Russia-Ukraine conflict. However, it's worth mentioning that the conditions of those two negotiating tracks differ vastly. In regards to Iran, U.S. And the current administration is bringing more, to put it metaphorically, more sticks and more carrots. Namely, Iran is under pressure. Their allies in Yemen are under military pressure by the U.S. U.S. is concentrating significant military forces in Indian Ocean. And that is one of the big push which may bring some breakthrough in U.S.-Iranian negotiations. Plus, we have also some positive signaling that U.S. is willing to reconsider more, let's say, limiting the sanctions against Iran. So the U.S. position in relations to Iran is pretty strong, and the toolkit in the hands of Washington is much bigger than in that other negotiations regarding Russia or Russia-Ukraine. There I can't see any strong signaling or putting more, let's say, hardware. On the contrary, we see rather limiting U.S. support for Ukraine, and while Iran is being more pressed by the U.S. militarily, Russia, as of recently, is pressed less. So I would say that there are significant structural differences between American approach to Iran and American approach to Russia as we see the situation right now, comparatively.
Right. Thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on Eastern Express.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. The United States seem to be sending out stronger signals in Russia's direction. This time, a Russian official says that Washington will consider resuming direct air travel between the two countries only if progress is made towards a ceasefire in Ukraine.
Russia has been trying to use the recent thaw in its relations with the United States to gain concessions. Moscow is interested in revitalizing some of its trade with the West, and a resumption of flights would go a very long way in achieving this. Both the European Union and the United States closed their airspaces to Russian carriers in the wake of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Moscow responded in kind and imposed bans on Western airlines. The idea to restore direct flights between Russia and the United States first came up during talks between the two countries in Istanbul back in February. The topic came up again in April, and it seems that Washington wants to use it as a bargaining chip to achieve its goal of reaching a ceasefire.
Although Moscow has had its hand full with dealing with the United States, that doesn't mean Russia has no other endeavors on its mind. Now, the country's Supreme Court recently removed the Taliban from the list of terrorist organizations.
Russia and the Taliban have not seen eye to eye for many decades. The animosity goes back to 2003, when Moscow branded the group a terrorist organization over its alleged support for Islamist insurgents in the North Caucasus region. Now, however, it seems that Russia is interested in making some goodwill with the Taliban. While the Supreme Court's latest decision doesn't equal formal diplomatic recognition, it does make it easier for Russian officials to engage with the Taliban at formal events, and is regarded as a step towards normalization of relations. Taliban officials have made several high-level visits to Russia in the last few years. Notably, their attendance at the Economic Forum in St. Petersburg in 2022 and 2024 marked a landmark shift. The Taliban also met with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in 2023.
The future may not be looking too bright for Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan. The country's political opposition has been showing signs of unifying against him and his government.
For the last year and a half or so, Pashinyan's administration has been guiding Armenia away from its traditional ally, Russia. Instead, the Prime Minister has opted to boost ties and deepen integration with the United States and the European Union. He's gone so far as to initiate the long-term EU accession process, and has even put forward a radical plan to transform Armenian society. Many of these policies have been met with strong public skepticism, but the Armenian opposition, busy with infighting, has so far been unable to capitalize on this mood. Now, however, the political situation might be changing. The results of the recent municipal election in Armenia's second largest city of Gyumri point to a potential anti-government alliance coming together. While Pashinyan's party did receive the single largest share of votes, 4 other opposition parties together topped that result and elected a Pashinyan critic as mayor.
And that's all for this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.